Disney Pixar's latest film splashed into theaters this last weekend, but it hasn't quite caught fire like they thought it would. Should you go see it this weekend in theaters? Stay tuned to This, That and Theology and find out. You're watching This, That, and Theology, helping you apply your worldview in the world around you. Disney Pixar has had a few duds in the last few years, and they were hoping to kind of restore some ground with their latest option, Elemental. Disney Pixar's latest film is essentially a rom-com set in the city of Elemental City, where multiple races are depicted by the different kinds of elements. Our main character, Ember, is from Firetown, which is a place where most of the residents of Fireland have come and immigrated into the city and settled. Her parents experienced a lot of prejudice and a hate because they were fire people. They have a large distrust, particularly of the water people. So it's no surprise that when Wade comes through the burst pipes of her father's shop, Ember wants to keep things a little quiet as she starts to develop a friendship and eventually romantic interest in Wade. Throughout the film, you see the tensions of the two of them as they are from two different sides of the city, from two different worlds and two different backgrounds, and the question of they really could mix. Throughout even the trailers and in the movie, you hear the phrase, "Elements cannot mix," and Wade and Ember trying to push back against that. There's also some messaging in the film. Primary messaging, which is right there in your face and told to you directly, and secondary messaging, which is just implied that you're supposed to accept just because it exists in the film. I was pleased to see that this was a film with a new IP. This was a new story with new characters, even if the elements from this story, pun intended, are kind of familiar. As far as primary messaging goes, they are really trying to tell a story about immigrants and racism. Both the fire people and the water people do exhibit a certain amount of prejudice towards the other people. Ironically, the movie does use a lot of stereotypes for its storytelling. However, there's a purpose for that, especially when telling stories to kids. If your audience is kids, you tend to want to tell things in broad, generalized strokes. So the fire people have a lot of the stereotypical behaviors, accents, and culture that you might expect from Asian immigrants. In some of the same ways, the water people have some of the stereotypes of rich, affluent, established peoples. The distrust that Ember's father has towards the water people is not completely unearned, but it also is played off at a little bit more stereotypical. The primary or explicit messaging that's happening in this film is that we can mix, that we are people, that despite our differences and our different backgrounds, or even our own cultural norms and likes, can interact with each other. The second primary or explicit messaging that happens in this film has to do with Ember and her father. There is a burden that Ember feels because her father has sacrificed so much for her well-being. He left his home country to try to forge a new life, opened a shop, and worked diligently with his own hands to restore the space so that he would have a legacy that he could pass on to Ember. Ember feels like the only way she can repay such great sacrifice is to sacrifice her own hopes and dreams in the same way. I love the way that the relationship between Ember and her father is portrayed in this film. They are loving, they care for each other even when they disagree. Even though Ember's behavior is something she knows her father would hate, she seeks to honor her father in all ways that she can, even in breaking off her relationship with Wade if it's something that would honor her father. One of my favorite lines from the film comes near the end when Ember's father looks at her and says, "The dream was never the shop. You were the dream." Very often we as parents hope for the best for our children. We have dreams that we hope they will fulfill. We ultimately tend to want what's best for our kids. We want to see them happy and prosperous and successful. We sometimes don't realize we haven't communicated that as well to our kids as we need to. Our children need to know that the dream is not their success or for them taking over our dreams, but rather they themselves are a dream. Children are a blessing and a gift from God. We need to make sure that they know that. They're not an inconvenience. They're not something that keeps us from doing what we want to do. They are a gift in and of themselves. They are an answer to prayer. And they're a way that we honor God and each other by loving our children. In the same way, Ember is putting burdens on herself that her parents never did. She assumes a lot of things about what her parents may want her to be or want her to do. This is an important message for kids, that sometimes we are putting burdens on ourselves that our parents never have. Even adult children have to realize that there are some times that we are assuming a certain degree of expectation on our own lives that our parents have never put there. I walked away from seeing Elemental not overly impressed, but not disappointed either. Some of the animation is absolutely stunning, and I loved seeing how real physical properties are displayed throughout the film. Fire gets close to water, and water starts to boil. When fire interacts with minerals, she changes color. It's a really neat way of seeing how the physical science around us is displayed in the animation. Now, I did talk about a concerning element and also secondary messaging, which is implicit. If you look up Pixar Elemental, some of the first results that you'll find is that this is the first film that Disney has a non-binary character. When we're introduced to Wade's family about halfway through the film, we see his older brother and his wife and their 2 kids. We also meet his little sister, Lake, who is described in the media as being a non-binary character. We are also introduced to Lake's girlfriend. It's not something that's spent a lot of time on, but it is very clearly there and very explicitly stated. The important thing to remember here is that there's no explicit messaging about this. Unlike some of the other films that Pixar has put out recently, this is not something that's front and center, something that they're telling you to believe in or telling you to pay attention to. It's just something that's accepted as a normal part of everyday life. 3 years ago, the Academy Awards put out new guidelines for Best Picture that included guidelines on diversity, on representation for minority groups, including the LGBTQ community. Any film that wants to be considered for some of these top categories in the Academy Awards needs to have some of that representation. Disney Pixar wants to be considered for these awards. There is going to be some kind of nod towards that community. You need to make the decision yourself for you and your family if you want to see this in theaters, thereby speaking with your dollars, or wait till it comes out on a streaming service like Disney Plus. I know for my family, we have made some decisions not to see films even on Disney Plus because we don't want those views on the algorithm when it comes to certain kinds of messaging. But that's up to you and your family. We can't shield our children from these things in the culture that we live in today. If you're teaching your children a godly and biblical understanding of sex, gender, and relationships, then you also need to expose them in a controlled manner to the world around you so that they know how to apply their biblical worldview into a worldview that disagrees with them. Hopefully this video has been helpful to you as you've been trying to figure out how to guide your family through the culture today, how to bolster your own worldview in their lives, even as you're making sure they understand the worldview as it's communicated to them through media. If this video has been helpful, be sure to like it, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment below. Make sure you've hit that bell icon so you can see when we have new videos posted. I hope you have a great day, and thanks for watching This, That, and Theology.